Hello whisky fans and welcome back. This is going to be the first review in the series of reviews on whisky from new distilleries, and we're starting off with a Scotch. It's Lochlea Sowing Edition. So very attractive presentation on this one, comes in a cardboard carton, lovely colour scheme. And I'm sure a lot of you will be aware that Lochlea is a lowland whisky. So in theory we should be in for something a little bit lighter, more delicate, but obviously geographical regions don't necessarily dictate flavour in all distilleries, especially not these days, so we will have to see. I do really like the presentation on this one though. Comes in this lovely squat retro dumpy square bottle, nice cork enclosure, little paper seal across the top. The cardboard box is essentially exactly the same size as the bottle, so really no wastage there. It's about as compact and probably as environmentally friendly as it can be. As for the specs on this one, pretty good, I would say. It is 48% ABV, it's non-chill filtered, and it's natural colour. And better than that, I'll just show you the label. It actually says the same details on the box as well. It's all there, it's all very clear. It tells you that it's non-chill filtered and natural colour right on the front of the label and the box. So not only do we know that they're doing everything right now, but we have that guarantee for future. So if they go and do a Glendronach and decide to go for a more commercial mass market style of whisky, we'll know because it's going to disappear from the label in the box. So 10 out of 10 for that, but really it's not hard, is it? There's no reason why all distilleries shouldn't be able to offer this level of presentation for us. Other things that we know from Lochlea, we know that we're told that they grow their own barley. We're not told if they malt their own barley on site, and we're also not told if all of the barley that they use in production is stuff that they grow themselves or if it's only a part of what they use. But we do know that all of the casks from Lochlea are matured on site. Now, I think that's a very good effort. There are very, very few distilleries in Scotland or anywhere that do the full process, including growing the grain themselves on site. The fact that we don't know if this is bottled on site is neither here nor there really. I think that the fact that they mature this on site is really good and probably makes a much bigger difference than wherever it's bottled, because the vast majority of distilleries in Scotland these days, they're either tankering their whisky off to be bottled somewhere else, or probably the majority of cases they're shipping their whisky to be matured in casks at some central warehouse. Another interesting thing about Lochlea is the production director at Lochlea is a certain John Campbell, who might be a familiar name to many of you because he used to work at a certain Islay distillery, and it's a certain Islay distillery that's known for its love of E150A caramel colouring. So really, really glad to see and to be able to say that Lochlea are doing a much, much better job. So that's about all the details, but you can't get away from discussing the price. And the price for this one, even though it's essentially a 3-year-old whisky, I paid around £50 for this one, which, when you consider that they've only been around for a few years and they're recouping that cost, it's a very expensive time for any new distillery. I think that's about fair enough. It's pretty much on par with what all of the other new distilleries are charging. I did try to get my hands on a bottle of the inaugural release from Lochlea, which was a few months ago now, but I never even saw it on sale. The inaugural release from Lochlea, I was looking at all of the online retailers all that morning, constantly refreshing, and in a matter of minutes for me, it went from not available to out of stock literally in a matter of seconds, which I think is very suspicious. Rather predictably, a lot, and I mean a lot of those bottles of that inaugural release, they all popped up within a matter of hours in a lot of cases on various auction sites, which is really, really sad. Although, from what I saw, a lot of those bottles of the inaugural release, it seemed like a lot of them were selling for a roundabout retail price, or sometimes even a little bit less. So it seems that some of those flippers, those people that were speculatively buying just so they could put it onto an auction site, no intentions of drinking themselves, those flippers, it would seem that a lot of them may have made a loss on that one. Good. I'm glad. Sorry, I had something in my throat there. But anyway, both the inaugural release is completely sold out. You might find it for a stupid price that you shouldn't pay on an auction website, but you really shouldn't pay that. But this one is also sold out because it's a few months old now, the second release that they did, the Sowing Edition. But I'm glad to say that things seem to have calmed down a bit, and you can actually get the Lochlea Barley, they call it, is the release that's out now. It's still available here in the UK. I haven't tried it. This one is matured in 100% ex-bourbon casks. The Barley that you can get now is matured in a mix of bourbon, Oloroso sherry and STR barriques. And let me tell you, after trying a lot of different new whiskies from new distilleries recently, I am absolutely sick of STR casks, because they've kind of become the new standard way to disguise young whiskey. Me personally, I went for this one on purpose. I chose the 100% bourbon matured version deliberately because I think you get to see more of the whiskey. So Lochlea Sowing Edition, first crop. I think they might be planning to do these every year, these sort of 4 seasonal releases each year to show you how the whiskey is maturing and progressing. But Lochlea Sowing Edition, let's get some in a glass and see what it's like. What's that, you say? What glass am I using today? Well, I'm glad you asked. This is my Ardnamurchan Distillery glass, which I actually picked up when it's not going to focus, but trust me that is an Ardnamurchan glass that I picked up when I was there. We have got a bottle of Ardnamurchan in the new Distilleries release series. Get to that shortly. But task in hand, Lochlea Sowing Edition on the nose. So lovely and bright and fresh. A little bit of sweetness, but very well balanced. In particular, there is a hard mineral note on the nose of this one, which kind of goes hand in hand with what I'm going to put it out there and say is some obvious youth. There is a lot of youth and immaturity on the nose of this one, but it gets better. There's also a rather pleasant dry cereal barley note on the nose of this one. As well, some lovely creamy vanilla. You can tell that they've used some really good bourbon casks in this one, fresh, I would guess first fill casks. There's also a really nice toasted peppery oak quality coming through from the casks. Getting some dried hay on the nose, so the kind of thing that a lot of people will associate with a lowland whiskey, as well as some quite herbal notes on the nose. And those herbal notes actually remind me, it's kind of a little bit gin-like. Really nice maltiness on the nose. You really get a strong sense of the barley on this one, which you would expect, seeing as they are basically calling all of these releases, naming them after the barley. Really lovely maltiness. A little touch of lemon and more of those lovely barley notes. Let's see how it tastes. I absolutely love the colour of this one. It just goes to show that all of these bottlings, especially blends and your Dalmores and things like that, that we get that are rust coloured or almost dark brown tobacco or orange Tizer coloured malts, it's absolutely ridiculous. This is what colour whiskey comes out of some reasonably active bourbon casks after 3 or 4 years. That is the colour of an honestly presented whiskey. Whiskey should not necessarily be dark. I'm really pleased to say that that immaturity on the nose is very much toned down when you get to the palate. The palate is much, much better and much more mature than what you get on the nose. Getting some lovely barley notes. Tasting this, it's very obviously a malted barley spirit. It's really all about the grain. There are still signs of youth on the palate of this one. if you were blind tasting this, you'd probably guess that it was maybe a 5-year-old whiskey. But on the palate, it's really much less of a problem, much less noticeable, with some lovely mature malty notes coming in. Also getting some really nice lemony notes. And normally, lemon in a whiskey is quite often a sweet lemon, but in this whiskey it's not. It's a really nice, dry, bitter lemon with a sharp, unripe tangerine note. Also getting some more grassy notes, grassy hay, green apple, apple peel, really nice bitter oak, as well as a really nice astringent grapefruit quality. Really pleasantly drying and astringent on the late palate, moving into a finish which is pretty short, must be said. Quite short and simple finish, which you would probably expect for such a young whiskey, with a pleasant bitter lemon edge. Now, one question that I had with this whiskey when I bought it is that ABV. Because the inaugural release, the big one that everyone lost their stuff over and everyone decided that they needed to buy it just to sell it to someone else, because that's what we do apparently, that one was only 46%. But this one is a very healthy 48%, and that made me wonder, why have they decided for that higher ABV on this one compared to the majority of the stuff that they've released, which I think has been at 46. But I think when you taste this stuff, it becomes apparent why they've done that. I think that bourbon maturation on this, it's made it that bit lighter. I think that this whiskey, if they'd put it into first fill bourbon casks and bottled it at 46%, it could possibly have been a little bit lacking in body and power. So I think that the fact that they've gone for that honest, straightforward bourbon maturation and then beefed it up to 48 is a really clever move. And also, I suspect that what might have been a little bit too light and a little bit lacking in body will probably sort itself out with a bit more age. I also can't express enough how much I like the style that Lochlea have adopted for their whiskey. It's a very, very lowland style. It actually reminds me quite a lot of some of the older Bladnoch releases. And I don't mean old as in higher age statement. I mean the kind of stuff that Bladnoch were putting out before they were kind of resurrected and rebranded recently. Because a lot of the older Bladnoch releases from after the re-release, they tend to be quite dominated by wine and sherry casks. Whereas this is, I think it's more like Bladnoch of old. I think that this is a really good and really proper lowland whiskey, a lowland style whiskey. Is it too young? Well, it definitely is young, but I think that it's really only hugely problematic on the nose, and I imagine in another couple of years it'll probably be in a much better place. Personally, I can see this Lochlea, if they carry on with this style of whiskey, I can see it turning into something similar to a young, unpeated Bruichladdich. And a very nice one too. I actually think that already, even at such a young age, this Lochlea Sowing Edition, I already kind of prefer this to the Bruichladdich Classic Laddie. So for this first Lochlea that I've tried from the new distillery, I'm going to go with a C+ for this one. And that's mainly only being dragged down by that immaturity on the nose. If it wasn't for that, I would probably score this firmly into the Bs. As it is, I think that this whiskey is an incredibly good effort. I think that it's well worth a try at sort of £45-50. I haven't tried the current version, which is matured in Oloroso and STR casks as well. I would probably suggest that you try to find something like this. I'm hoping that they will have more 100% bourbon cask maturations going forward, because I really like that and I think that it works really well. But as this whiskey is, I think that it smells 3 years old and probably tastes 5 to 6 years old. I think that it's a really intriguing and stereotypical, in a good way, lowland bourbon matured whiskey, which is a style that I really love. And if they come out with more bourbon matured stuff, I'll definitely buy it again. So I hope you've enjoyed this review, and if you've tried anything from Lochlea, especially if you've tried this and some of the other Oloroso and STR matured versions, let me know what you think about the difference between the two. Really interested to hear that. But thanks for watching, and cheers.